Administration and Projects Committee meeting to order and welcome you here. Let me get my agenda up in front of me. Okay, first item on our agenda is public comment. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak under public comment on any item affecting this agency that is not on the agenda? Seeing no one come forward, we'll close the public comment period and go to the approval of the minutes. Any changes, additions, or a motion?
Move approval. Second.
Motion by Hudson, second by Arnrich. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries unanimously. Next item is the consent calendar. We do have an item. Wait a minute. Didn't you tell me? Yes. We have an item we need to talk about first, and that is item 6. And I believe this goes to you, Ross.
Yes. Good morning, Chair. Rush.
Also want to include item 4. I had just one.
Okay, so we'll pull both items 4 and 6 for discussion first.
Thanks.
Well, 6. You have a handout on your on the dais here, and it replaces pages 6.4 and 6.5, or 6-4, 6-5 in your package. There's some wording error in the second whereas, and then we've changed the signature block for HDR from Carl Hack to Mike Lohman. So we'd like to have the handout inserted as part of that consent item.
Very good. Any objection to that? No. Okay. Newell?
Just a quick question. On item 4, this is AECOM adding additional services. What I couldn't figure out was, how much is the contract that we're adding? Because it's blank. So is it just T&M and these are the rates? And
well, yes, Ross Chitnut again. It is a time and material contract. I don't know the exact amount. Ivan, you know
is there
the
a not
base
to
contract
exceed
amount?
Or some? So at least we're budgeting and say we've appropriated. Otherwise, Randy puts some magic number in the account and has to wait and say, is it 50,000 or 250,000? Maybe.
Excuse me, Commissioner. Are you asking about the value of the amendment or the base contract?
The value of the amendment that's being talked about.
Okay, so this is a scope-only amendment. At this time, we're anticipating that we may be able to absorb this additional scope within the original budget.
Okay, that I didn't understand.
And depending on the amount of testing that we do, it's a little unknown now. It's dependent on the contractor's operations. We may have to come back for an amendment. But at this point in time, scope only, no budget change.
Okay. All right, great. And with that, I would move the consent calendar.
All right. I have a motion by Arnrich, second by Hudson to move the consent calendar with the amendments to item 6. All in favor say aye. 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 Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you. We are on to the regular agenda items, and we need to make a change in the arrangement of them. We need to take item 11 first, the debt policy revision item. So I believe, Randy, you're in charge of that.
Right. Good morning. Happy New Year. I'm Randy Carlton, the CFO for the authority. The item before you is an action item. It amends an existing resolution that the board adopted in 2005. In short, we call it our debt policy. Just like we have policies on how we invest money, we have policies on how we go about issuing debt. And within the contents of this policy, you will find the types of debt that we authorize, delegations of duties, et cetera. But, as you know, things have happened since 2005. We've had the banking crisis. We've had the legislation to follow called the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Transparency and Accountability Act, which brought a number of reforms to the banking industry. And one of those reforms is to regulate how investment bankers communicate with public agencies. The concern is if what they're communicating to a public agency is construed as advice and they also profit from that advice, it may not be in the best interest of the public agency. So the regulations now clarify a particular role. An independent financial advisor which is a designated entity to advise the public agency instead of the investment bankers. And we have that with PFM, and you may have noticed Peter Schellenberger's in the audience today. Now, why is this important? Well, we have an RFP process on the street right now to form a new investment banking pool, and each time we do something like that, we ask for the best ideas out there to take a look at our entire debt portfolio, and as you know, that includes our swap transactions. So we don't want to handcuff our bankers by limiting to what they can look at in terms of presenting their ideas. So we have to amend our debt policy to include certain language that clearly delineates that we have an independent financial advisor with PFM and that we're relying on their advice. And then there's a procedure that we need to follow by giving the bankers a letter. It's called a safe harbor letter that says that, in effect, that we're a sophisticated issuer, that we have a financial advisor, and it's okay for them, in effect, to put their ideas in the proposal. It's a rather technical matter. It's a very long policy, but what we've done as part of this review is we've really cut it down significantly. In 2005, as you know, things were very different. There was a long list of derivative-type products that were, perhaps considered in vogue at the time, which are no longer, part of what would be the board's risk tolerance. So we've really carved out all of that and simplified the policy and have taken out those exotic things that we wouldn't be doing anyway. So it's with staff recommendation that you adopt these revisions. It will make for a more robust RFP process for the investment bankers to take a good, comprehensive look at everything. And we will return to the APC with a recommendation at a later date on those proposals. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions, comments? Bob?
Randy, how much more work, less work it is for us as the agency versus the gentleman out there? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Well, it's how much more careful do we need to be? There's a higher level of scrutiny that's placed on.
But is that on us as the agency?
It's
or
on
our bankers?
It's mostly on the banks. They have departments that do nothing but monitor their regulatory compliance, and one of those is that they do not want to be in a position where, as an investment banker, they're also viewed as a financial advisor. That's the dividing line now that the Dodd-Frank legislation has placed on the banking industry. So from our perspective, we need to comply with it as well, and we have those enabling provisions in our revised policy in front of you. For actual work on us, not much.
No, it's actually on
Yes.
the banks, not even on our financial advisor.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Motion?
So moved.
Motion by Taylor, second by Hudson. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Makes good sense to me. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for coming, Peter. We appreciate it.
Go get some coffee. Don't take all of it.
Yeah. Okay, so back to our regular agenda items, and we go back to item 9, our legislative update.
Good
Lindsay.
morning. Mark Watts is here from our state advocacy group, Smith, Watson, Martinez, to give you a brief update. Because it's January, we're always very optimistic about what the legislature is going to do with transportation. So I'll let Mark be the one to encourage that enthusiasm or burst the bubble.
Good morning. Glad to be here. In your packet, there was a memo that kind of gave a forecast of items and issues to look forward to for 2015. There's been a couple things to update that, so I thought I'd start off first with probably the most potentially exciting development in the last several weeks, which is the governor's call for action on transportation finance and funding in his inaugural speech. Several of us, Will Kemp and myself, Jim Arp from the Alliance for Jobs, have been meeting with the governor's office to encourage the governor's office to do that. They surprised us by going ahead and putting that in there. And immediately upon that announcement by the governor, later that afternoon, the Secretary Kelly reached out to his California Transportation Infrastructure Priority Work Group, which is his group he's been using for the last 2 years, and said, this is our job now to help develop for the administration what would be a plausible new funding approach for transportation. You know, where will this go? Who knows? But at least it's on the table. I'd say probably the only disheartening aspect of the governor's call was it was limited to maintenance and deferred maintenance and rehabilitation. All very, very necessary things, but it did leave out any direct reference to capacity projects or operational improvements. So we'll see how this unfolds. But that was exciting news for us. The legislature, just to recap, the chairs were announced principally in December. You're very fortunate here having a former board member as the new chairman of the Assembly Transportation Committee, Mr. Frazier. In the Assembly, on the budget side, which is also very important in these days for transportation, Assemblymember Bloom from Santa Monica will continue to be the chair. He's from he did a very nice job last year, and we expect to see him very active this year. In the Senate, the Bay Area again came out ahead with a new chair, Jim Bell, former MTC commissioner, former county supervisor from Santa Clara, former VTA board member. So he knows a lot about transportation, and some of us have worked with him dating back 30 years when he was active in the Californians for Better Transportation. So you've got two very, very fine folks from the Bay Area as chairs for the first time in a long time. The one other development to announce is that the CTC Executive Director position was vacated, and Will Kempton, who is somebody I work with on a coalition, is going to be assuming that position on January 19th. He's excited. He thinks he can help flesh out a transportation funding solution from the inside. So we hope he can do that. A couple of other quick things. There are some carryover bills, or at least I characterize them that way, that are of great interest. We're analyzing them to understand their impacts. The first category are bills that would seek to eliminate the cap and trade regime from the fuels distribution system that started on January 15th. The bills that were introduced last year didn't fare well. We're not sure they're even going to get set this year, so I'll be monitoring them and coordinating with Lindsay as we move forward. The fuel tax swap is going to become a potential issue. The last several years, or last year at least, we had the gas tax adjusted by a negative 3 cents per gallon, and that was principally based on less usage, not on the price. And now we've had, for the benefit of consumers and the economy, we've had a really great couple of months of very, very reduced gas prices, but they're going to have an impact because the sales tax or the tax rate is based on the percentage as well, so of the price. So I am anticipating that the fuel tax swap annual adjustment could be a shock. I'm working with Mr. Frazier's office to try to get an estimate from the Board of Equalization now instead of waiting till it plops up on the table later in the spring, so we can figure out if there's ways to deal with that. So that's an issue that's emerging kind of quietly and stealthily, but it could be a disaster at the end of the day. And finally, looking forward to just the big overarching issues outside of transportation. The state budget is going to be a very, very interesting challenge, I think. We've all know that the legislative analyst has estimated, and we've seen recent reports that the revenues are coming in greater than had been anticipated, and the LAO has estimated that a $4 billion extra is available for the reserve. but some things have happened. The Proposition 2 dedicates about half of that to the rainy day fund, and the other the other 50% would be dedicated to paying down debt. So if folks are looking to expand or institute new programs legislatively or through the budget process, they're going to have a challenge, and I can foresee some raucous debates in the Capitol on the budget. Probably won't relate to the transportation arena, but it'll be layered over it, and we'll be dealing with that as an overlay. Final comment on the committees. I left this to the last because the Senate just released their list of committee members. I think the key thing I see for these two committees, aside from the benefit to the Bay Area of having two chairs from the Bay Area, is that there's a whole host of new members who have no familiarity with state transportation finance that I'm aware of. For example, in the Senate, there's 5 carryover members, senators on the committee, and 6 new members. And in the Assembly, it's split 8 and 8. So I think the transportation community has a bit of a work cut out for themselves to educate them, bring them up to speed, because they won't be as aware and cognizant of the shortfalls that we're all aware of, and we don't want them working in a vacuum, so we'll be working on that. So that concludes my report.
I would ask how big a change you think the staffing on the Senate Transportation Committee side is going to make. It seems to me that staffing change could have a huge impact as well, because it's been pretty much sewn up for some time, and this could be a newbie that doesn't really know anything either. So,
well, that's true. And so to that point on the Senate, Kerry Cornwell, who had been with Torlickson's office and then Senator DeSaulnier's chief consultant for transportation. So you've had a person who's familiar with Contra Costa, but and an expert in transportation finance and funding and policy depart. So she's gone, and in her place, Randy Chin, who really has a background in utility policy, is coming in. There's also the loss of Mark Stivers. So for ABAG and people who are focusing on housing issues, his departure,
might bring fresh perspective.
Exactly.
Was
Thank
that
you.
diplomatic?
Thank you for saving me. And the replacement, I've forgotten her last name. I just met her yesterday. Came out of the transportation agency.
Okay.
And doesn't have a strong background in housing, but has some familiarity with the issue to a degree. So,
well, that's encouraging then that the replacement at least understands something about transportation.
Yeah.
And we can educate her on the rest, right?
Exactly.
All right. Other questions from commissioners for Mark? All right. Back to you, Lindsay.
Well, I think this item was marked as an action item because we wanted to leave the door open in the event that there were any items we wanted you to take action on, but it appears we just have an update today, so no action is necessary.
Okay. Very good. You want to add anything about the federal side of things at all, or the staff report is pretty much what it is?
So the staff report is still accurate, even though it was produced before Christmas. There's a lot of talk and posturing right now happening at the federal level, but nothing of substance has been introduced that we need to pay attention to.
Okay. Very good. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Randy?
Well, we have one more issue.
Oh, okay.
Randy just asked me to brief the APC just on a matter that's come forward, as well as to put this on Mark's radar. Our sister agency, ACTC, is looking for an author for some legislation that would put in the PUC, the Public Utilities Code, where we have the enabling legislation for us as a transportation authority to tweak the bond authorization provisions to allow for something called premium bonds. It's something that we, at the time when we issue bonds, like to have as a tool. It's something that if the investors in that given market desire, that's something that makes sense for them and it makes sense for us to issue premium bonds where we could reduce our cost or add funds to our construction fund. We would like to have that option. And a recent bond council opinion has changed all this recently and taken a more conservative look that premium bonds are not allowed by state law for transportation authorities that fall under that enabling legislation. So we'll be working with Lindsay, ACTC, our legislative advocates to get behind that effort to amend state law.
Any questions on that? Okay, very good. Thank you. On to item 10, our strategic communications plan. Lindsay, it's your day.
Good morning. I like to do all my business in January, so the rest of the year is hopefully easier. What you have before you is a proposed amendment to contract number 328 with Barbary Coast Consulting. And I want to recognize Alexis Smith, who's partner, I saw her back there, in Barbary Coast, who's here this morning as well. Just a little background, Barbary Coast was selected as part of a competitive RFP in 2011 to put together a strategic communications plan. And in 2012, the authority was very happy with the plan that they put together and selected Barbary Coast to actually begin execution of that plan. And since I know it may have been a long time since you've seen the strategic communications plan, I did include it in your packet just to refresh your memory of some of the elements that were identified that were to be worked on during the past couple years. And we've made some great strides in accomplishing some of those actions. And I just want to take you for a brief stroll down memory lane and show you a few of those items as you consider the contract amendment. One of the biggest items that they worked on was the Contra Costa Transportation Authority website. It's also probably one of the most visible items. So you can see there's really a dramatic change. It hadn't been changed in many years. It underwent a big transformation. And there are still a lot of elements that haven't necessarily been activated in the new website yet. So even though we've really tried to redesign it to make it more public-friendly and user-friendly, there's still a little bit of work to go in that process. They've also spent a lot of time developing some additional online collateral for us. We now have a social media presence for the first time on Facebook. We've also launched an e-newsletter this past year, and we actually have a series of them. So you may have noticed you've also been able to get your notifications about your APC packet from an official Contra Costa Transportation Authority email account instead of just the administrative assistants, and we're allowing the public to subscribe to also get the packets upon demand, and they can manage their own preferences for that. They've also done a lot of work with our fact sheets to try to make them a little more visually interesting and friendly for the public so they can stand alone as their own pieces. And these really have formed the basis of our Measure J strategic plan that gets updated periodically. So I know kind of before my time, Hisham had spent a lot of time working with Barbary Coast on trying to make these a little more accessible for the general public. They've also done a lot of work on our printed collateral, our annual reports, our federal legislative pieces that we take with us when we go advocate in Washington, D.C. So as you can see, they've really done a lot of work kind of developing our brand and our identity. They've put together a set of brand guidelines and kind of instructions for all of our partners about how to use the logo. And so that all of our stuff starts to look the same and sound the same and have the same tone, which is really important that you're able to kind of identify and pick out what items are ours when you're looking at a large field of 5 items. Another item that they spent a lot of time on this past year, they built our countywide transportation plan public participation tool. They developed the little icons to help describe what we do, and they built the whole network that allows people to kind of share, vote, and like other types of ideas. So they do also the kind of the back-end management for not only this countywide transportation plan website, but the ccta.net website as well. They've also been really instrumental in helping with some of our media relations. They've been very involved in the test bed and had a large hand in helping make sure we got, the more than $500,000 of media coverage we did about the test bed launching in our partnership with Mercedes. They drafted the media release related to the countywide transportation plan and helped pitch that. They've helped with a Highway 4 media tour that happened before I arrived. And they also kind of maintain and update a lot of our media lists that we use. They help with community events. These are just some pictures from Bike to Work Day that they helped with. And so moving forward, there's, as I mentioned, a lot of the elements have been started and in progress, and some of them are completed, but there's still a lot of work to do. It's an ongoing process, kind of like maintenance on your house. You can build your house, but if you don't take care of your house and continue to do all the maintenance items, it will fall into disrepair, and we don't want that to happen with our brand and our identity, especially as we're entering a really important period of public outreach and education. So these are some of the new communications needs and some of the ones that require some ongoing support. This is all in your packet. It's pulled directly from there, so I'm not going to repeat them all for you. But it's really kind of building and improving upon the work that we've already done, and we do have some new projects like the test bed that are going to need some support and attention. And since they've been involved, they're a really great candidate to help do that. This table is also pulled directly from your packet. So I wanted to just kind of lay out for you a little bit of the history and the budget history of this contract and show you what we're asking for from now through June 30th, 2016. And I picked June 30th, 2016 because it's the end of our fiscal year for that year. And it just kind of, I'm trying to put most of my contracts on a fiscal year basis to make it easier to renew them. And so, with that, as you can see in the packet, staff has been really happy with the professionalism and the timeliness and the quality of the work that we have gotten from Barbary Coast Consulting. And we do recommend the contract amendment, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about it.
Any questions? Bob?
I guess I'm being a little vocal this morning. I remember when we got Barbary Coast, and I was very excited because I've always been an advocate of this agency and kind of getting out there. A lot of people at that time had no idea what CCTA was, so they took on a daunting task of probably a lot of field work and pioneer work. I guess the question I'm asking, if you go back to the other slide, was it $359,400? That's for a one-year contract?
I'm sorry, that's technically from February 1st of this year, 2015, through June 30th, 2016. So it's about a year and a half.
About a year. And is that in line with where we approximately started? What was it, 2011, 2012? In other words, a proportionately. And I guess what I really want to make sure, obviously now social media, which we're learning in what we're trying to accomplish further down the road in regards to passing a
So to answer
deal.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you already know where I'm leading.
To answer your question about kind of the budget alignment and
got
how
it.
that stacks up. So as you see in 2012, the authority allocated a little less than $250,000. And we are at this point about 2 years later, a little more than that, just now getting down to the end of that dollar amount. And during that time, that budget supported, a lot of these items that I just showed you, the website redesign and everything else. But there was also a period of time in there where my predecessor had retired and before I started, where there was not a lot of activity happening in terms of creating new collateral and really putting the agency to work. They were in a little bit of a holding pattern. So that's why that amount was able to kind of last as long as it did, because there was probably about a 4 to 6 month period in there where there wasn't a lot of work happening.
Well, I guess let me interrupt you, and then you come back to what you're saying. I guess what I'm really my lead point is that a lot of the groundwork now has been laid. So as we look forward to spending $359.4, we're not going to rebuild the shoes. So what exactly are we going to do?
So in a big picture level, because there is a detailed budget in your packet, but big picture, there are probably about 3 or 4 kind of pages and areas of the website that haven't been built out yet, and that's an intensive effort to kind of map a timeline and to help tell our story to the public. A lot of something that we have talked about doing in some of the other kind of public education arenas include making videos. Videos are becoming the way many people get their news and information now, either online from their phones through social media. So some of these dollars go to help tell our story visually in video format that can be shared across social media to try to get people to visit our site and learn more about us. So we're not recreating anything that's already been done. We do have a set of ongoing needs. We know that we need to produce an annual report every year. We know that we need to do maintenance to the website. We know, Ross's team has been very prolific in delivering projects, and we know that we need to get out in front of the media to talk about those. We need to host events, ribbon cuttings, and groundbreakings. All of these types of items are things that are encompassed in that cost that you're saying.
Because I guess what I was really coming to is as each time now, I'd like to make sure that this contract makes sure that as we cut ribbons, it's very significant now, ribbon cuttings, because this has become an organization that needs to be in the forefront of the county. And, we're helping each city, so it's not necessarily a East County thing. It encompasses everything. So I just want to make sure that these things are now going to be covered in particularly in and I'd like to say social media as well as visual media. So I'm done.
That's absolutely the intention.
Okay, Newell?
Lindsay, thanks for the report and thanks for the great work. A little bit on the line, but a different angle than what Bob was saying. About half of this contract extension, 154,000 of it, is a full-time person. So it's really putting a dedicated staff member. And I guess the question I have is from a policy point of view, is that the most cost-effective way to do it is one? And two, does that portend that we're suggesting we're looking for another full-time person? Because this is built in. It says dedicated staff. It's got 2,700 hours for 17 months. That's a full-time person. So, how are we going to use that person? Because that is not based on any task. It just says dedicated staff. That means full-time person. So what's the thought process? What do we expect to see July 1st, 2016 then?
So the intention behind having kind of that dedicated staff person, I think that's how that's mentioned, is to have somebody who spends, from Barbary Coast, who spends some time in the CCTA office, not necessarily 40 hours a week or full-time, but some time in the office so that I have a direct connection with that person so that we can go through all of the tasks that are on hand, and that person is also sitting here to help make some of the updates to the website, to help pitch media reporters, to help do some of that in-house so that it can be a little more closely supervised by myself, but also to give me a little more support in those areas. When you're trying to get out a press release, and you're calling as many reporters as you can to make sure they got it, to try to line up interviews for Randy, that definitely takes up a significant portion of time. So to have somebody who is kind of dedicated from Barbary Coast to help with those types of activities when we need it, kind of on demand, is really helpful. It frees up a little more of my time. And at that point, I don't have to compete with the rest of the Barbary Coast team and any of the other clients for the type of work that we're doing. I can say, I need somebody all day tomorrow to sit here and call reporters. And having that dedicated staff member is what allows us to have the opportunity to do that. It's really to kind of increase the coordination and speed up the execution of some of the elements.
So, and that's kind of what I suspected, and I appreciate that. So, what you're saying is we are getting a full-time person. So my question then was, is this, based on how you just described it, that means we need this person? And it doesn't mean that on July 1st of a year from now, we don't need that person. So the question is this the most cost-effective way, given that we're really asking for a full-time person?
I think, in my opinion, this is the most cost-effective way. It's similar to how we use some staff in terms of the project side, and they're consultants to help manage some of our projects in conjunction with our staff. So it's based on a similar concept and philosophy that this person does act as an extension of staff. I do think it's cost effective to use a consultant for this one because the knowledge base is already there with Barbary Coast. They've actually been working on many of these projects longer than I have because they were on board before I am. And that's very knowledgeable to have that, to take somebody new and hire them and train them. There's a very steep learning curve here, and we lose quite a bit of time trying to get somebody up to speed enough to jump in. So to me, this is the most cost-effective way because the person who helps with this is already knowledgeable and is ready to start running tomorrow.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lindsay.
Mike?
Yeah, sorry for being late. Other things came up. Well, Candace Anderson is less important. Okay. Anyway, the question is this, following on with Newell's line. Under what circumstances would you not need this person, say, a year from now?
I think it's hard to predict what the future holds, and communications platforms and needs do change. I don't anticipate there will be a time where I never need help with communications. I'm a department of one, so having help from consultants in various teams is what allows us to be out in the community and help get our word out as much as possible. So in terms of a day-to-day basis, is that what you're asking, in terms of how flexible is it and how much time that person spends here? I think that's something that, Barbary Coast and I still need to sit down and discuss. We haven't necessarily said this person will sit in our office full time. What that dedicated staffing connotation was meant to do was to really tell them that I want somebody available to me full time to work only on our items.
Well, one of the reasons you go to a salt and pepper kind of organization, which is what we've been doing with first Nolte, then with Parsons, is because you have like peaks and valleys in the workload, and so you can change out people and let them go, bring them on as the workload demands. I'm not hearing that this is quite the same situation, and if that's the case, then wouldn't there be possibly an argument for bringing on a person full-time on staff, which I think is where Newell's coming from.
So to answer your question, having the dedicated staff through the consultant does allow us to flex and adjust the hours. So there may be weeks or months that are busier than others in terms of communications activities. So this does allow me to say, we maybe only need somebody 20 hours this week, that dedicated person. That number is not set in stone and guaranteed. That will be billed monthly based on need, so that can be adjusted. That is in there because we didn't want to hide anything. We wanted to show you that we really do need some support, and we wanted somebody who can really focus on our efforts. But that number is adjustable. Those hours are adjustable. And that's why we do think it's the most cost-effective way to do it through a consultant.
Well, okay, so what I just heard you say, that let's say you got to a point where you only need somebody 20 hours a week, well, then you could let them go. Well, all right, if you're going to have it that way, then who's to say the consultant couldn't send you somebody completely different? Have you got some sort of an agreement where you've got first dibs on an individual or pair of individuals?
The intention that we've been discussing is that there will be essentially one individual whose hours will be kind of reserved for CCTA. And then if I don't need those hours, that individual can work for other clients or on other projects that Barbary Coast has, but the knowledge base will remain with one individual. That person will be available to us first.
And my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, would also be that if we need expertise that is not necessarily that one person's wheelhouse, we have access to the entire staff at Barbary Coast for any specialized expertise.
Correct. The whole team is available to us. This person is a conduit. It's really our kind of official liaison with the agency.
So that gives us a broader base of expertise and probably a broader base of ideas available to us, which I think is really valuable. I mean, one person may have a certain level of expertise in one item, but maybe not in all. So to me, that seems like a more logical way to go, to use a consultant for that. But that's my perspective. Bob?
I guess this isn't a grilling, I'm just trying to grasp what it is, so bear with me. So I guess this is really an 18-month contract. So
Correct.
oh, well, I'm off by 30
17.
days. Oh, my God.
Starts in February.
So
ends in July.
17 months.
Yes.
So,
Hold on. Let Bob finish. Hang on. No?
no.
Well, he's still gasping for air over here.
I understand. Give him a chance. Go ahead, Bob.
We'll be here a long time. On this avenue. So I guess you're for the $159,000, you're really getting a year and a half worth, which is relatively cheap if you do it in my simplistic way. But I guess what I'm asking, if you don't, you can't rescind the money. You can't keep the money once we've obligated on the contract. It's still going to be $359.
No, it's time and materials.
Time and material.
It's as needed.
As needed. And I just wanted to make sure that
They could save money like we did the last time when we had 6 months off.
Okay, the mayor's done.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, so this is 18 months, and I tell you right now, I'm for this thing, but I still think that we owe it to everyone to make doggone sure that there is a more cost-effective way to deliver this service. I suspect that there's enough that you don't know about what's coming on in the next 18 months that you want to be a little bit flexible. I can appreciate that. However, I would sure want to see in 18 months that this is subject of is it time to bring somebody on staff or not, discussed very, very honestly with APC. Now, mind you, I don't want to build staff. I think building staff is the last thing you ever want to do. But you do it if it's more cost effective, and that needs to be examined again in 18 months.
And I think that this will help us determine what kind of support we'll need in the future. This is a little bit of a trial basis as part of this contract amendment, and I think that trying this out will allow us to have the discussion that you're hoping to have in 18 months with a lot more knowledge about our needs.
And it will allow us to track how much we used one person versus the entire team. Right. Okay. Very good. Tom?
Is there any way to build some metrics into this to evaluate the effectiveness of it? Like, you do a poll right now and ask people, have you ever heard of CCTA and what's your favorite thing about them? And then maybe a year from now you do it again and see if there's been any improvement.
We certainly have done some polling on that topic as part of the countywide transportation plan. I think there are several metrics we can use to measure the effectiveness of the work that Barbary Coast is doing in terms of media tracking and website hits and social media. I'm a little hesitant to do it in terms of whether people have heard from us or not, because we do have multiple consultants working on different aspects of our countywide transportation plan and other projects that could play into that. And I don't necessarily, the public can be a little fickle, but I'm happy to bring back some concrete measurements that we can use related to the work that they do to see whether we're making progress.
For instance, we are tracking the number of hits on the website and where they come from and things like that. So we're able to find out whether it's just commissioners going to the website and staff, or whether it's actually people in the public who are learning about us for the first time and looking for information. Newell.
Lindsay, I want to compliment you. You've been grilled here. Management sat there with a big smile on their face, and you did an outstanding job answering all of your questions. I think you have some good food for thought, and I think the last thing you said was probably most important to me was this will give us an opportunity to figure out where we're at, where we're headed, what are our needs. So through this process, this contract gives you the flexibility to pull people in and out, develop the resources, get some of our platforms up to a more permanent level, and then have the flexibility to respond to things that come up. So with that, I compliment you. And I think that's pretty amazing. They didn't say a word the whole time. So I would go ahead and move this item. And given all the context of what you heard, and hope to hear back on those items in the future.
Okay, motion by Arnrich, second by Metcalf. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimously. All right, we've already heard item 11. Item 12, correspondence and news clippings. You've seen that. Commissioner and staff comments. I have no comments or reports. Commissioner comments, reports on activities, meetings, anything like that? Don't see anybody jumping there. Executive staff. Randy, you haven't said a word today.
I was going to jump in on.
She had it in hand. You didn't need to say a thing. All right. Any other business for the good of the order? If not, we are adjourned to our next meeting proposed for February 5th, 2015. Thank you all.